To talk us through what you're announcing today, it's quite a sort of seismic change in policy for your party.
Yes, that's right. So at the moment, we have huge challenges in the country, particularly around growth in the economy and in living standards. And actually, one of the biggest problems that the country faces is that our electricity prices are too high. So what we've said is we have to look at why that's happening. Some of that is because of the Climate Change Act, which creates these very rigid budgets and makes ministers choose these decisions which are going to make them poorer. So we need to repeal that, and we need to rethink of our energy strategy to put cheap electricity first.
The Climate Change Act was first passed in 2008,
Yes.
but would you acknowledge that the critical part of it, that I think you're objecting to, that might make it put those sort of straitjackets on government ministers because of that legal requirement to meet the 2050 net zero goal, was introduced by a Tory government, by Theresa May in 2019?
Yes, so this act started, as you say, almost 20 years ago, and it was strengthened in 2019. And Kemi Badenoch was actually one of the few people in Parliament who spoke up and asked questions about the costs. And what we need to do in opposition is look at things where we think we were in the wrong position, look at the challenges that the country faces now. As I said, I think the really high cost of electricity is causing huge harm to families and businesses. And by the way, it's incredibly harmful for the decarbonisation agenda, because what you want people to do next is to adopt electric vehicles and electric home heating. And what Ed Miliband is doing is making electricity incredibly expensive. So these things are now pulling in the opposite direction. And we need to make sure that we can have a strategy which focuses on global emissions. You know, we think that is important. We want to look at British innovation that can sell and export clean tech around the world, on protecting nature, which I think, again, rightly one of the British people's priorities, but unashamedly is looking at how you can make that electricity price cheaper.
Do you think we should still, as a nation, be aiming to be net zero by 2050?
No, I think we've got this the wrong way around. I think what we need to do is look at why people aren't decarbonising. At the moment, it's the cost. So the best thing that we can do is focus our attention on making electricity cheaper. And that will do two things. That will, firstly, in terms of growth, that will improve growth in this country. It will also mean we stop seeing industries move from here to countries abroad, to places like China, which are still powered by coal. So that's better for emissions. And it's also better for families.
I want to talk a little bit about Michelle Mone and PPE Medpro. This company has been ordered to repay £122 million because of faulty PPE during the pandemic. Obviously, this was a company given a contract by the Tory government at the time. Does the government need to take some responsibility for awarding that contract that obviously led to faulty equipment?
Yes, I think it was disgraceful what she's done. It was also a Conservative government who started the lawsuits. The lawsuit, which means that she's had to repay this money, started in, I think it was 2022, when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. So I think during the pandemic, obviously, it was a very difficult time. You had Rachel Reeves saying that we should give contracts to medieval costumier, and all of these things were happening because people were very panicked. And in certain cases, those PPE contracts, which I think the public have been rightly disgusted by, you saw people who didn't live up to their promises and pocketed huge amounts of money. So I think it was right that the last Conservative government brought in that lawsuit, and I think it's right she's had to pay the money back. And she's now lost the Conservative whip. And as I say, I think the right thing is happening here in that she has to return the money. So were there big mistakes made by the government in awarding some of these contracts? Would you go further and ask the question, at least, as to whether some ministers were also in the wrong and should be punished in some way or not? So from everything I saw in the pandemic is government was working in an incredibly frantic environment. Big decisions were made. If you look at something like the vaccine rollout, we also changed some of the procurement rules there, and actually that speed worked for the country. And I think in this case, it's the people who applied for those contracts, did not deliver, and pocketed huge amounts of money. They should pay it back. If any other wrongdoing occurred, of course people should face justice. But I think the most important thing is the people who didn't deliver on what they promised the government that they could do, which is providing that PPE, should pay that money back.
Should Michelle Mone remain a member of the House of Lords? I guess it's up to her, unless the government wished to legislate to remove her.
Well, like I said, we've taken away the Conservative whip. She's no longer a Conservative peer, and I think the honourable thing to do, particularly in light of this, would be to resign.
In terms of the sort of other week's headlines, big ones coming from the Tory party conference, Do you think Reform's policy towards indefinite leave to remain is racist?
I think it was wrong and stupid of the Prime Minister to say that, frankly, because what voters will have heard is that he's calling them racist. And now I know lots of people in the country incredibly worried about immigration, incredibly worried about illegal immigration. They're not racist. They have serious and valid concerns. And what politicians should be doing is, instead of sort of slinging these insults about, they should be seriously looking at how they can fix those problems for people who have extremely valid concerns.
What's the mood like in your party ahead of your own conference? Is it fair to say that the last year the party's underperformed?
Well, look, I think the first year after opposition is always hard. I think any party at the moment is seeing there's lots of different parties popping up. You've got sort of the Jeremy Corbyn stuff happening on the left. There's a huge amount going on. But I think what's really important is that the country at the moment, as you sort of alluded to in your last question, it's divided. We have huge problems, particularly around growth, particularly around sort of cost of living and immigration. And what political parties should be doing is, instead of sort of waving their handbags at each other, is putting forward credible policies which can fix people's problems.
Claire Coutinho, thanks so much for joining us.